Hey everybody, Richard Bliss Brooke here with yet another Authentic Networker podcast interview. And today I have my golf and poker buddy from Scottsdale, Arizona, Ken McElroy, who is just one of the wizards of real estate, at least in my world. And before we went live on this interview, we were talking about just a little residential second home transaction that he pirated over the last 4 or 5 years, made more money on one home than most people do in their entire life. Welcome to the Authentic Networker, Ken.
Hey, thanks, Richard. Great to see you, man. Really good. I follow you on social media. I miss you. I haven't seen you for a couple summers. So great to see you and Kimmy on social media.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, we do that. And we left the mainland and came to Hawaii. And so we don't get back there often enough, but we still have great friends there like you. And I'm sure we'll cross paths again. I've got an audience, Ken, that I know is just going to eat up your wisdom and your experience in real estate. You've written a bunch of best-selling books. You are the real estate wisdom and authorship behind Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And you got a phenomenal podcast of your own. We'll get into some of your accomplishments in the interview, but can you just give people like a sense of, okay, you're on top of the world. I mean, maybe give this, here's context for you. This man, folks, has purchased over $1 billion worth of real estate. And I know he didn't start off that way. Can you give people a sense of how you grew up and where you got your humble beginnings in real estate? Because I just read that and it was a pretty phenomenal story. So we'll give the whole journey a beginning and an end.
Sure. Well, it's funny, Richard, when my parents, barely graduated from high school, and they were super poor growing up, and so were we. But I didn't know any better. Honestly, my parents, it was what it was, and I never got new stuff for school. They were always hand-me-downs, and I never went to, the store to get school clothes or anything like that. But even my first suit I got at a thrift store with my first job right out of college, of all things. But I actually look at that as a massively positive thing, because I really value relationships. I really value how people, how valuable money can be in changing people. I don't value money, but I value what it can do for people. So I grew up with that perspective of not having much. And I tell you what, everything was a massive barrier for me. I had so many ceilings in my head. From the time I was young, my mom, I always remember my mom, and it was true. She would say, "We can't afford that." I'm sure a zillion kids have heard that. We can't afford that. We can't afford that. And it was true. We could not afford it. And so just punching through those different barriers. And then I probably got a little aloof once I plowed in and started making money. The first time I lost it a couple times, and I kind of lost my way, and then I kind of got back and got grounded again. And it's not really complicated. I don't think, especially, I like real estate a lot. I've been burned. I've given guys money for so many things, that ask, whether it's a gold mine or a stock portfolio or a stock tip or a wealth manager or a life insurance policy or whatever. And I tell you what, the one thing that always kind of just stays with me is like real estate. I always tell people, like, don't you wish you still own the house that you grew up in? Like, isn't it worth like a gazillion more? I'm like, yeah, well, okay. Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, so I just stuck to that, because It's not that complicated. If you can buy some real estate, even if you don't have the money, and have a tenant pay it off, those are, that just makes sense to me. So all I did was I just scaled that. And so, now my partner Ross and I, we have about 250 people, and in our company, we build, we buy, we manage mostly apartments, multifamily. I do own some office and some self-storage, and we do land development and stuff. But I started with a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, using my own money, and then I bought a second one, and they cash flowed. I kept those for a long time. My tenants paid them down, so I made good money when I ended up selling them. But I try not to sell much. And then along the way, I learned about all the tax benefits that you get, like depreciation and cash out refinances and bonus depreciation and cost segregations and all the things. I didn't know about any of this stuff. And I just learned it, as I found people that were smarter than me to help me unwind it all. And then next thing you know, I was writing books for, I ran into Kiyosaki, years ago. And I was pitching him on a deal. I was, as when you run out of money, you have to syndicate, you have to find money. So I was pitching Robert. I was in a group called EO. Now I'm in YPO. But EO, one of my friends said, you really should meet this guy. He wrote this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. It was not the hit that it is now. So I went and bought it, read it, met with him, and we hit it off. And they ended up investing almost a year later. And then I went to one of his seminars just to see what he was up to. And he called me up on stage, and then that kind of took off. I went a direction with that, but I always stuck to my core, which was doing real estate deals. So whenever I went and spoke for Robert, I would just talk about whatever deal I'm working on at the moment. And so it was always interesting to me. It was never canned, never kind of out of the box. It was just whatever I was working on at the time, and always seemed to work. So then I wrote the books, and those took off. And, I just stick to my core, which is real estate. It seems to give back to me more than I deserve. That's for sure.
Well, you haven't made any money in golf, I presume.
No, not at all. No, in fact, I always go up to BlackRock. I leave with an empty wallet.
Right. So let's start with the first duplex you said you bought, and then you bought another one. Because I think most of the audience here, Ken, they're not at the place where they're going to wire you $500,000 to be part of your syndicate. Maybe a few, if they're smart, because you're, part of the number I read is you've got 10,000 units now in ownership. Wow. That's from 1 to 10,000 units. And that's not including the commercial stuff. That's just the apartments. Tell us about the first one. Where was it? What did it cost? What were you doing for a living? What was your income? Sure. How did you buy it?
Yeah. So I was my first job out of school was property management. And, you'll love this story. My buddy calls me up, and he's somebody that I went to high school with. It was his brother. And he's like, hey, do you want to manage this property downtown Seattle? And I'm like, well, what does it pay? And he's like, free rent. I'm like, I'm in, so, cause I was racking up student debt. So I moved into this place. I'm like, how hard could it be to collect rent? Well, luckily my dad was a contractor, so I could fix things. I knew how to do that kind of stuff. And so I moved in, and man, that was my learning lesson. That was really the, boots on the ground. And I'll never forget the guy who owned it pulled up. I met him like 2 months later, and he pulls up in this really nice Mercedes. Back then it was like a 500 SEL, and I was like, wow, that's a nice car. He comes in and he sits down, and I hand him the deposits for that month. And he's like, hey, thank you for turning this place around and filling it up. I was just trying to work less. I was like, how do I not show units? Well, easy, just fill them up with good people that pay and you're good. Well, and so I realized at that point, I was on the wrong side of the desk, man. I needed to be on that side of the desk. And so I started in property management. And that's what I did right out of college. That was my only job. And then I moved to Phoenix to, start my own business with a friend of mine. And we ended up taking over this condo conversion from a Canadian developer, and who I became very, very good friends with and partners with later. And he took an apartment building and he was selling office condos. And so I bought one of those for 160,000. I must have been making maybe 80 to 100 grand or something. This is in the 80s, maybe late 80s, early 90s. And, I had 30, 40 grand in the bank, and I used most of it for my down payment. And,
Right.
but I made sure that it was cash flowing. And because I was in the property management business, I got that. I was like, okay, here's what my mortgage is going to be. Here's what my utilities are going to be, my taxes, and here's what the rent's going to be. And it cash flowed just about $100 a month. And I was like, as long as I keep it full, it puts $100 a month into my pocket. That was my very first real estate investment. And then I did it again. Then of course, you're out of your down payments. So
Right.
you got to figure out, either you got to save a lot or figure out how to find those deals for somebody else. And then I just knew that in order for me to scale it, I was going to have to, there's a lot of wealthy people out there, really good people with money that don't trust or don't know who to give it to and invest it. And they don't know how to invest it. So if you can find a good deal, that's all I've tried to do is find stuff that cash flows, find stuff that gives really good tax benefits, and then put investor groups into those, and then hold them long term and take advantage of everything. So those are my first two deals. I ran out of money really quickly, and I was like, if I'm going to keep doing this, I was trying to get financially free. At the time, my burn rate was only like $3,000 a month or something. That was all. I knew if I could, but unfortunately, as you know, I needed like 20 plus deals in order to get to that point at 100 a month. So
Right.
that was the model for me. I was like, how do I generate enough passive income to cover my monthly expenses so that, I can, don't have to rely on that paycheck.
So you moved into other people's monies. We'll get into that, but let's stay with the two units that you bought. How long did you keep them? And what did you net on them when you sold them?
Yeah, so I kept them a while. So, I'm a kind of a lock and leave guy. So I don't really calculate my equity, when the market's up, and like some people do. I
Right.
focus on cash flow. I was working on the debt, some of them I would refinance, but I kept both of them somewhere between 6 to 8 years each. And I made somewhere between maybe 30 to 50 grand more each, and got, of course, my original capital back. But there's a bunch of things that play there. One is if you catch the market right, you can get that appreciation, but not always. It can go the other way. But the one thing that does stay true is your tenant pays down your mortgage. So I did know that. So, if I could find somebody to pay off my loan, if I could find a bank to give me an investor loan, I could get somebody to pay down my loan, then I definitely got all that. So that's what I call forced equity. And then if you also can figure out a way to where you're buying it here and, and the market's kind of trending up, then you can get it there as well. And so luckily on those two, I did it. And so what I started to learn at that point, and the reason I sold, Richard, is I learned the theory of the velocity of money. So in other words, I wasn't just selling and then, trying to, dump that money into savings or anything. I actually had a reason to move that money into something else. So,
Yeah.
so if I'm selling something, generally, I'm moving it into the next piece, the next building block, whatever that might be. And so I'm
Something that's
managing
got
my own
more
money that
leverage.
way.
Something that's got more leverage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be, or something that has a lot of upside, a lot of value add, or you're buying something, at the beginning of, some kind of a run.
Right. All right. So tell me what I did wrong, Ken.
I don't think you've done much wrong from my viewpoint.
I gotta hear this. Gotta hear. I'm a horrible real estate investor. So, you know my building in Riverstone?
Yes.
Yeah. So I bought that building in 2001 for $4,050,000. It was the second building in all of Riverstone. Second building built. And it stayed fully leased, rare exceptions, until I sold it in 2000. Gosh, I'm going to say 15. I sold it. I still have some lease space there, but I sold it in like 2015 for $4,165,000. And I had to pay John Butler a $160,000 commission.
Oh my God.
What did I do wrong?
Well, as I always tell people, it's you make your money when you buy, believe it or not. And so, typically, I'll give you multiple examples. When we're buying a piece of real estate, like we bought a lot in 07, 8, 9, 10. And so we were buying from the bank. And I bought, one of the best deals we got was I bought a 680 unit property in San Antonio, right across from USAA Insurance.
Yeah.
So it was 50% vacant, and it was owned by Bank of America. And so, I still remember it was listed, and of course everything was kind of falling apart in 08, 09. So, we ended up going to the bank and getting them to write down their loan down to 20 million. They took a loss. And then I raised about 7.5 million. So I was all into that deal for around 28 million bucks. But I fixed it. I cleaned it up. We leased it up, and it took 1.5 years, but I had a plan around it. And then when we went to get a refinance, the value was 42 million. So I created 15 million in equity. I call it forced equity. And all I did, Richard, was I took something that was broken, that was sitting on the shelf at a bank, and I fixed it with, sound management. A lot of people can do this exact thing. It's just, you just take good sound management, renovate the properties, put good people in it. And it does take time and experience, but then you go back to the bank, and then we ended up getting I think it was around a $32 or $33 million loan, because it was worth 42 million. Well, right. So now I pay the 20 off, back to the Bank of America's happy. I pay off all my investors, the 7.5, they're happy. And we got some more pocket change, 3 or 4 million extra cash, but I still own the building even today. And, everyone's got their money back, and it kicks off cash flow. And that money that the investors got back, that was tax-free because it's a cash out refi. So, so that's a win all the way around. The investors got their money back. They're still in the deal for the same percentage. They still get cash flow. We still own the building. And then of course, we still have a lot of equity in it. So that's why I say you make your money when you buy, and if you are going to exit, obviously you have another tax issue,
Yeah, I did. So if we scale that concept down to the most of the people that are listening here, what I heard you say was the art is to buy something that is undervalued, and is probably undervalued because it's undermanaged and undermaintained. And so you buy it, go in and clean it up, raise the rent, or in the case of an apartment complex, get it rented, get the other 50% rented. So the cash flow changes dramatically. Then you have something that's worth more than you paid for it. Get it refinanced. Now you can pull the capital out of the refinance and invest that capital in something else.
100% accurate. Yep. And if you can articulate that in a business plan for somebody, then that's how they invest. So before I close on the property, Richard, I knew that I was going to be right around 40 million in value, because all you got to do is calculate the rents minus the expenses and kind of get the net operating income. And you can kind of generally, if you do that, if you get to 93, 94% occupancy, then you can kind of figure out what it's going to be worth. You can move forward, but you just have to get there. But I've done this over and over and over and over. I mean, you know, right now, people are going to do it with all these vacant malls that are going to be coming up because Amazon's killing all them. They're going to be doing it with these little micro hotels that, you know, are closed right now to COVID. And, you know, they're going to get converted to apartments and assisted care. And so it's going to be the same thing. It's just, that's not the world that I'm in, but my friends are doing that. And so, you know, it's just, how do you change use? How do you repurpose something? I'll give you the greatest story at a small level. We were looking at land actually in Phoenix, of all places. I also own some billboards, and I like billboards because they, you know, they don't talk back, you know, they don't have any employees. And, you know, you could stick some ads up on the top and, you know, and the cash flow. And so, but anyway, I was looking at this land, and it's just a couple acres, wasn't very big, but had a billboard on it. And the billboard, it said billboard revenue 5,000 in 2019 or 2018 or whatever. And the land was only 300 grand. Like, you know, so I'm like, okay. So I call my buddy and I'm like, hey, what do you think of this billboard? Because it's on a main road. And he's like, oh, that thing should be doing anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 a month. And I said, oh, okay. So even on the low end, that's good. So I put it into escrow. I call him up and I dig a little more into the billboard business, and I hire him. And I put an easement around the billboard, which cost me about $5,000. And then I listed the land and I sold it again. So I sold the land and I own the billboard, has an easement on the land. And right now it's doing right around between 3,000 and 4,000 a month per, about a couple grand per site. And so I got this, you know, call it $3,000 or $4,000 a month cash flowing billboard, you know, for free. And so, and that's at a $300,000 investment. And so I think, you know, people, it's kind of what you see, you know, and real estate and deals, as you know, I mean, you're a deal guy. It's what you see. It's what other people don't see. And so, you know, some people run from stuff that's broken, or don't see the potential of the opportunity. And that's actually where all the money's made is there. If everyone can buy something and hope it goes up, you know, that's really easy.
Yeah, I think that was me. So one of the things that you said that I think is really profound is, as we listen to you describe your art, is that before you invest in real estate, invest in your education. So you have all these distinctions, Ken. I mean, you just see it, right? You're looking at whatever, if it's a real estate listing, the cash flow statement, the expenses, all the questions to ask. You can see it in your mind, like, this whole spreadsheet, and you can see the opportunities. What do you provide? And I know you provide it, just articulate it here. If I'm somebody looking, and again, I think most of my audience would be happy if they had one second home commercial something property that they were leveraging for $300,000 or $400,000, $500,000. What do you offer to people? Where would you guide people in your company to learn from you, to learn the basics? You've got 4 or 5 best-selling books. What else have you got where people can study to learn the art of real estate investing?
Thank you. Well, here's what I got this question. I was playing golf last week with a young man that just he was actually a big football star at Arizona State, and he played for the Seahawks until he blew out his ACL and everything. And he's telling me, he's like, well, I don't know what to do, my career. And I go, listen, there's 2 excuses, time and money. As you know, you've heard all of these. I go, if the one thing about COVID is, if you haven't figured out the time, then it's a discipline issue because everyone got basically shoved home. And so you can't use time as an excuse right now. Anybody that's using time as an excuse, they have to change their habits. And so, I think, Richard, gosh, I mean, you and I know, like, it's what's available now, especially on YouTube or, with some of these guys that are really doing deals. It's amazing. And so I started a YouTube channel in March. Gosh, we're up to 140,000 subscribers or something already. And I'm just putting out stuff that I do. I mean, I'm telling the truth. I'm not selling a thing. And I'm saying, if you're doing this, make sure you're doing this. And it's going like this. There's a lot of really good, smart people out there. And certainly at kenmcelroy.com, we have a bunch of videos. We have free downloads. We have podcasts. We have all those things. But there's a lot of guys out there that aren't really doing investment real estate, that are selling books and tapes and seminars and stuff. And nothing wrong with education, but you got to be careful on who your teachers are. So if you're going to listen to somebody, I've had lots of mentors in my life. I still do. I meet with them on a number of levels, and just to always fine tune myself. You have to be, I think you should take advice from somebody who's done it and somebody who's doing it. And I still have mentors. They're 70, 80 years old. I still meet with them, and they beat the heck out of me on, everything from relationships to what I'm prioritizing, because your priorities change, as you get older, a little more experienced. So I'm a big fan of coaches and mentors, and I've never paid for a coach or a mentor. I have actually paid for a lot of personal development, a lot, but I'm a massive fan and a massive proponent of fine tuning yourself.
Yeah. So you made a good point there. Perhaps find a mentor who's done it. And I don't think when you say done it, you mean wrote a book about it.
Right.
They actually did it, whether they wrote a book or not, because it doesn't matter how many people you've studied. You can go study, you can read 5 books and then go write your own book, right? But that's not mastery. And as we're listening to you describe how you did these deals and what you look for and your creativity, and that's mastery. And that only comes from some success, but a lot of failure.
A lot,
right? A lot of deals that just didn't work out the way you thought they would.
Yeah. I remember I remember 2 big defining moments, and there's many, but I remember 2. One is when I first started going and dipping my toe into this big managed money, Wall Street, New York, to me was scary. I remember flying to New York and cutting a deal with Lehman Brothers, so I walk in, and the conference room was, oh my gosh, it was the biggest conference room still I think I've ever seen in my life. And I'm in there, like on one end of the table, and all of a sudden, 5 Harvard MBAs sit down across from me, and I'm like, why? How did I even get here? And I'm like, well, you listen, I know what I know. I'm gonna cut the deal that I can. And my buddy put it in perspective. He said, just remember, you're the dumbest one in the room. And I said, that's probably true. But, but they're all in there. And so, every single time that, as you got to punch through those, when you get butterflies and anxiety over things, whether it's a small deal or a medium-sized deal or a big deal, or even speaking on stage, which I still get, all that, I think those are good things. I really do. Cause I want to go in really prepared, and I want to keep my ego down. I want to be as humble as I can. I want to be grateful that I'm there. And there's a lot of things that you learn from being I would say, you overcompensate when you're younger, with confidence that isn't really there,
Well, speaking of that, I got to tell you another story you'll appreciate. So when I was I think about, let's see, I'd be about 27, 28 years old, which would be like 1982. I was making $40,000 a month, and I had a partner. I mean, he wasn't a business partner, but he was, we were in the same business, and he was a good friend, and he was making about 70 grand a month. And we were both complete idiots to the nth degree. But we decide that, well, we have all this cash flow, and right, so we need to be investing in real estate, right? And I had bought a little house back in my hometown. I actually bought it from my dad, and then I bought another one in Orlando where I lived, and then I bought another one. I mean, they were like cheap houses, and I didn't know what I was doing. But his name was Dave Austin, and so Dave and I got together one day and probably had too many cocktails, and we decided to create a real estate partnership. And you're going to love this, Ken, because this is the way it went. I said, okay, I'll keep buying rental houses, and you keep buying rental houses, Dave, and then we'll split them. And that was it. And about 2 or 3 years later, we got together, and I think I had 5 and he had 8. And we were so busy running and making money. We had no idea if any of them cash flowed, what they were worth, if they were even rented, right? So 2 or 3 years later, we met and we just agreed, okay, you keep yours, I'll keep mine. And we'd probably be really smart if we sold all of them, because we don't have any idea what we're doing.
Yeah.
That was my second big real estate entree that didn't work out too good. Personal development, Ken, I know you mentioned it a couple times, you're a huge fan, and it doesn't matter how much you know about real estate. If you can't manage your urges and your ego, and if you're inclined to take shortcuts and lie to people, and it's all going to come back around, right? What are some of the key epiphanies that you had in personal development about you that has allowed you not only to build wealth, but hang on to it?
Well, great segue, because the truth is, one of your chapters, that is this one here, I think, who are you? So that's what I've been exploring for the last 4 or 5 years. So this one really resonated with me. So a couple of my favorite books is Awareness by DeMello, Untethered Soul, and of course, a lot of the Tolle stuff. And so, some of the things that I'm doing personally, and this is stuff, I literally have Tolle books sitting next to me. I always fall asleep when I go to bed. So I try to digest a chapter or even a paragraph sometimes. And I think the one of the most profound things that I've been able to do, and mentors have beat me over, is, who am I? And so you go back to, talking about, you see it, I see it so clearly in our kids and people that we hang out with. You can tell when people are lying to you. I generally can. You can tell when people aren't being honest. You can tell by their body language. You can tell a lot of those things if you're aware. And most of the time, if you're conscious, and you can tell which people are operating out of their subconscious, and just kind of on their, whatever they're on, whether it's anxiety or stress, or, maybe they're habitual liars or whatever it is. And so, I think that just being aware of those kinds of things, whatever your pre-programming is, and just evaluating it has helped me the most. And that's why I like that chapter, who am I? Because Tolle says that all the time, that is one of the most profound questions. Who am I? Am I Ken? Not really. You know what I mean? That's the birth given name. But really, who am I? What are my relationships like with my kids? What are my relationships with my significant others, my family, my business associates, my clients, my investors. That's all very, 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 very important to me. And so those are coveted. Those are maintained. They're top of mind. Everything I do personally is to maintain those relationships. And it takes work, and it takes personal work, but it also takes work. And so I actually love that chapter. And I think the more present and aware you are to really understand really it is who you are, whether it's a phone call, how you respond to something, and that diffuses everything. Cause we all get wound up and we all get in arguments and, with people, but I always look at my own piece. So I like, what did I contribute to that? How did I, cause I can't control the other person. I can choose not to be around them. I can't choose what they say, what they do, what actions they have, or anything like that. And I don't obsess about any of that. I only look at my own relationship and say, is that something I can tolerate or want to tolerate? So I'm, all this came from the kid that grew up with an alcoholic father. You know what I mean? So very, very, I've been on this lifelong journey of personal development, and it's helped every single piece of my company. I'll tell you one of the things that it did. I didn't value culture in my firm after I started it. About 10 years ago, I started doing book studies for the whole company. We had 200 people would fly in. We would do a book study, and everyone would read the book. The first book was Good to Great. And we did a 2-day book study with the company. And then, we kept layering on books after that. And, we've done Tolley, we've done all this stuff. It's basically, so now every year I kind of look for books that I can read and ones that we can push down into the company. Sometimes we read a chapter, sometimes we'll spend 2 days on 1 or 2 chapters. And that whole thing has made the culture of my company just emerge. Like, it's been really gratifying. We're now number 1 in Arizona 4 or 5 years in a row, I think now, top company. And then nationally, are in the real estate world, we were 9th in the nation out of 54,000 companies. But those are all things that our employees write in about us. They're employee-based surveys. So that was not intentional. It was intentional to help build a culture, but I really did it, Richard, because a lot of people don't value personal development. I remember we brought in one speaker. I had 75 maintenance guys. My maintenance guys are all diverse culturally. Some of them can speak English, some of them can't speak English. They're 25 to 60 years old. And I remember, we're actually getting semi-spiritual, in some of these books, and they're crying and they're talking and they're speaking about things that are going on in their families. And you do a lot of this stuff, and it's magical. And so when you can help people, just move the needle a little bit, and then I learn at the same time. So I'm a massive personal development guy, and I will never stop.
And did that start with you? I read somewhere that your father quit drinking after 20 years and you got involved in Al-Anon.
Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. I was in college. I wrestled in college. That's how I got in. I had a wrestling scholarship, and didn't pay for everything. So I did have student loans too. But I remember my girlfriend at the time, she said, hey, let's go. They have things in the gym. And we went, and there was it was adult children of alcoholics. It was, they were doing a skit. And I remember I got really emotional because it was like, the 3 kids and the parents, and, it was all orchestrated, but it was exactly how I grew up. And it was the first time that I saw myself. And so I went down and grabbed this little book, and the next thing you know, I was like, oh my gosh, this is who I am. And I just started to unwind things from there. I was probably in my early 20s.
Wow. Yeah, I've never gone through it myself, but I've read so many good things about Al-Anon, and of course AA is its own personal development program, right?
Yeah.
So as we wrap this up, Ken, I'm sure something that's on the mind of anybody interested in real estate, you touched on it earlier, generally, don't you wish you still owned the house you grew up in? But where do you see real estate going in the next 4 years,
Yeah.
the next 7 years, the next 10 years? What do you see on the landscape?
Well, there's a bunch. It's a very detailed question, but I'll tell you what I see. In the short term, we have to get through this COVID forbearance. There's all close to 3 million people that are 90 days or more delinquent on their home that are in forbearance. And so, right now the CARES Act's kind of protecting everyone. And of course we have this massive pent up eviction issue. So
Right.
that all has to work itself out. That's going to take a couple of years. And so I do think we're going to see a flood of inventory on homes. And I do think that, we're going to have some massive disruption on with the apartments. My guys that are doing retail are in big trouble because, tenants aren't open, so they can't pay the rent. And then, of course, so they're going to have to deal with default. And, obviously regional malls, office buildings, all that kind of stuff. Big people are going to be taking their, big office floor plates that they have, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 feet, and they're going to do it 1,500 or 2,000. So we're already seeing a lot of that, and so that's going to have to work itself out. I think interest rates are going to really stay low for a long, long time, and I think we're going to have some real unemployment issues and some real affordability issues moving forward. So I would expect that the administration coming is going to probably push down some money for that in the form of rent of subsidies of some kind, just like they did with Section 8 or tax credit or stuff like that. So I would imagine that that's kind of where we're heading. Retail's pretty dead. Direct to consumer is the thing. Amazon kind of wiped it out. I tell everybody, COVID, from my standpoint, just sped everything up. It was already in motion. Like we were already having retail. They were fighting to stay open, but people were already buying online. All it did was take 10 years and bring it down to, a few months. And in a lot of ways, assisted care facilities are in big trouble right now. Their occupancies are really, really down because of COVID. I do think those will rebound, but there's a lot of potential there. The micro hotels, as I mentioned earlier, the resorts are in trouble, and so that all just has to work itself out. But the thing about real estate is that it exists for the people, so not the other way around. So and I think there could be massive opportunity around this university area. As the kids are parents and kids alike are, they're starting not to value the Zoom experience. I talked to my son right before this. He said they canceled spring break. I go, how do they cancel spring break? How does that work? He's like, well, they don't want us to spread COVID. I'm like, oh, that's a rite of passage. I mean, that's the reason you go to school. He's like, I know. So, so there's a big disconnect with, that so I think that we're going to see a lot of disruption in the real estate area, but with that comes massive, massive, massive opportunity, because, the last mile distribution, the warehouse stuff is doing really, really well. Like, Amazon wants everything within a mile of the city core everywhere, so they're putting up these distribution centers, and so are all the other big boys. And so, and cold storage is another thing that's jumping, and any kind of tech cloud center, the regional cloud stuff is just killing it. So there's things that are just on fire and things that are just going down in flames, but that's been normal. I mean, it's really been normal. People ask me, what's this new president going to do? I'm like, you guys, you don't realize when Bush was in office, who was a Republican, he was pushing home ownership, back in the day, which is completely fine, but it killed the rental business, And so I go, every administration has their own thing, and you just have to, as Bucky Fuller would say, you work with the forces and not against them, and, pay attention to what's happening, and then, try to be part of it and not resist it.
Yeah. move your money out of oil, gas, and coal and put it in green. Put it in green.
Anything
Put it
green.
simple.
Right. Exactly right.
Hey, you have a lot of books.
Yeah.
I have this one, The Advanced Guide to Real Estate Investing. And I have some Rich Dad books, not here with me, but if somebody was to back to the person who just wants to get a unit or two, and they want to get some traction in real estate investing, what's the best book you've ever written for that person?
So I have a starter book. It's called The ABCs of Buying Rental Property. And that just came out in September. So it's only a couple of months old. It's, for less than $20, it'll walk you through. And I'll just share with you one quick little story. I actually, my first book, The ABCs of Real Estate Investing, was basically a multi-unit investing strategy, because that's what I was doing at the time. So I wrote about what I knew. But what I should have done was gone all the way back to how I started, which is really what everybody really wants to know more. And I never wrote that book. But so I'm busy. So I hired a guy to help me write it, and he would meet with me every week. He was a retired professor that taught journalism. And during that process, he bought 2 rental properties. And I basically was like a mentoring session for him, and he's in the book. So he was retired at home, had all his home paid off, started a little LLC with him and his daughter. And, now he's on a roll. He's got a bunch of cash flowing properties. So I'm like, David, you got to put that in the book, this was all happening over about a year and a half while I was writing it. So that's the book I just released. And, it's obviously a ton of my stories, but also David's story is in there too.
Sure.
And the reason I love that is because things have changed since I first started buying my single family. So he was able to bring kind of the new stuff that was happening right now and the obstacles that he had on finding the money, on getting debt and finding renters, Airbnb, and all that stuff wasn't around when I started, and, short-term rentals and long-term rentals. And so anyway, so that's the one, ABCs of Buying Rental Property.
At KenMcElroy.com or Amazon?
Yeah, KenMcElroy.com is either one. Yep.
Awesome. Well, hey, buddy, this has been entertaining and fun and highly educational. You are just a brilliant mind in your field, and I love listening to mastery that has been carved out of adversity and courage and adventure and success. And you're just rich with the distinctions of mastery. And so I thank you so much for sharing it with my audience. Your personal development journey speaks specifically to authenticity, and the theme of everybody I interview is, I call it the authentic networker. You can just take a piece of that. The authentic human being, that's somebody that's real, grounded, in touch, honest, walks their talk, acknowledges their failures and their weaknesses, and is sucking it up to get better. And you've always been that person for me, and you're a great inspiration, and I appreciate you lending my audience the time.
Yeah, Richard, as always, man. Birds of a feather flock together, right? Jim Rohn says you are, your 5 closest friends. That's who you are, right?
Yes.
So I appreciate your friendship too, man. I miss you guys.
Yeah, missed you too. Thank you. And thank you, audience. If this interview was of value to you, share it with your network, share it with everyone you know. Listen to it more than once, because the second time, I promise you, you're probably going to learn more you're actually going to learn more than you did the first time. And the third time, so spaced repetition, study. Go to KenMcElroy.com, get the book, get on his YouTube channel, and get investing. Thanks for joining us on The Authentic Networker.